Nagging is not a missionary tool.
Somehow there needs to be less freak out.
That might not be the right answer, is to just get divorced.
When I was coming back to activity, I actually had these questions in my mind.
Welcome, everybody. I am Scott, Nursery Leaders Unite, and we have Cindy. Raise your hand. Thanks for being with us. Scott, or I'm sorry, Sam through the mist.
Hey.
And Jessica Christ Pearls, thanks for being here. Appreciate that. Topic today is how to support your loved ones if they decide to step away from the church. So just a real quick, I think this is a very big topic and something that comes up a lot for people sometimes personally, but if not personally, there's a lot of indirect relationships and people that we know that step away. And I think there's a lot of questions around how to support people who step away, or not support, leave them alone kind of mentality. And so Cindy, I was wondering if you could kind of go through what this looked like 20 years ago or so and kind of give us an update on how things might have changed from when someone steps away. What does it look like? What did it look like? And how has it looked different now? Any insight there?
Yeah. So I'm in my 60s, and up until about 10 years ago, you either just slowly fell out of activity or you were an apostate. The whole current, I mean, there was always anti-Mormon Exmo stuff, right? Always. But there was always just kind of these two camps. And then I don't know when it started, this whole stepping, like intentional stepping back from the church. But I became aware of it maybe 8 years ago. I'm sure I'm slow on the uptake, right? So I'm sure it had been in the works for a long time before that. But that's when I became aware of the very intentional, very visible, announcing it on social media, cognitive dissonance, stepping back from the church. Before that, it was either because you didn't go to church for a few times because of work or illness or whatever, and then it was just hard to come back, or you were offended, or those kinds of reasons. And then it turned into just information online and disagreement with church policy and more intentional stepping back. And then there seemed to be like a little turning point where people were starting to come back, and you get like the comeback podcast and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
So there's this idea that if you're a part of the LDS Church, the Restoration Movement, and you decide to step away for any reason, like if you decide that you hate everybody and everything and you're gone forever, or if you decide you're just going to take a break, or you accidentally slip away, that somehow there's this like decision that your local community makes to exile you and to make sure that nobody talks to you and everybody's mean to you and shuns you until you decide to recommit or something like that. Have you ever seen anything like that, Cindy, as far as like historical, cultural, and then recently?
I would say no, like intentional ostracizing and shunning. I think there's an awkwardness. And then I know of families where the family member that steps back becomes so contrarian, so contentious about everything, like they can't not talk about it, that eventually the rest of the family is like, okay, maybe we won't tell you when stuff is going on. Intentional, I would say no.
What about you, Sam? If I step away from the church, should I expect to be intentionally exiled?
Ooh, I think it depends on how you step away.
Okay.
Right? So like if you just lose your testimony and things you once believed, and that demonstrates a unwillingness to want to go to church any longer, and you leave on pretty neutral terms, like you don't believe in it, and so therefore why would you be at church if you didn't believe in it anymore? I I don't think that you should be ostracized. Absolutely not. No. I don't believe anybody should be ostracized, but there is a point to which, like, some of the anti or ex-Mormon literature kind of, it almost, it's more detrimental, I think, to a lot of people who potentially might not be as willing to learn more about the LDS faith tradition, to where I can say it'd be better if they were kind of ostracized, at least from some people. But at the same time, like, sometimes your faith being challenged is a good thing, right? And so
that it sounds like you're drawing a line between someone who leaves the church and someone who's trying to hurt those who are still in the church. Is that
correct? Kind of... Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I think that that's a pretty, like, logical line that most people will take. I mean, I've seen a lot of people, like, leave the church that left on pretty good terms. Like, they weren't ostracized from the community of individuals in whom they associate with in the church. It really just depends on, like, when you leave, what is your disposition back towards the church? Like, are you tearing down the faith of others after you leave? In which case, I can see where some of the pushback would come from members. But
yeah, I have two really good friends that left the church, and one of them left kind of like shoulders shrugged. I don't really want to do it anymore. I don't really care. Like, and they don't have any kind of reaction to the church when it comes up. And then another one who's pretty resentful and bitter and angry when it comes up. And so it's not fair to assume that it's going to be equally as difficult or easy to have conversations with those people, especially when the church topics come up. Jessica, what's been your experience? How easy is it to step away or to have those you love step away?
So I have experience on both sides of this. I don't think I've ever stepped away from the church. I have never done that. But I would say that I've fallen into periods of inactivity. That, you know, because I never, like, formally was like, I'm stepping away from the church, because unlike others that I know in my family friend circle who have, like, formally announced that they're stepping away from the church, this is something that I also started noticing probably it was about 10 years, because the first experience I had with it, I remember it was in 2015. And it was with a friend of mine where this was like a formal announcement on their social media that I saw this, and I was like, why would you say this on your social media?
Usually not a good start. Usually not a good start. It was a
bizarre thing. I just was like, why would you post this on your social media? But I guess the reason why they did that is because they felt like they had to, just so that people understood that they were going through something and that they really didn't want to be receiving messages about the church or the gospel. And they just felt like they had to make it official so that people wouldn't make assumptions that just because they'd grown up in the church, that they were still open to having conversations about it. They were, like, really closed off to it at that point, and wanted people to just, I guess, respect a boundary. So they were setting a boundary, and I think that's how they viewed it. Me, on the other hand, not so much. Like, first of all, I'm just going to say, you guys, I have always known that the church is true. I have never doubted in my life that the church is true. There's been times where I've had to wrestle with things. I've had to wrestle with if it is the true church. But when I felt like I received the answer for me was so undeniable that I never had to keep questioning it again. And that was long before I fell into periods of inactivity. That was when I was very, very young. But the inactivity for me came more from a different source, like a different insecurity, I guess you could say. It was not one of questioning the church, whether it was really the restored priesthood. Like, those questions I felt like had been answered, but then I had other questions. They were more personal to me. And I do see other people struggle with things like this. And so I guess this is why I want to bring this up, because there's times where, like with my friend who made this official announcement, there were questions about if the church was even true, if it's even real, if God is even real. I mean, it was going back to, like, the fundamentals. For me, I felt like I knew God was real. I knew that Jesus is the Christ. I did have to determine what church was true, because I was actually raised in, like, 2 churches. And so I did kind of have to wrestle with that a little bit. But once I got that answer, I felt like I had that. But then the question was, can I even do this? Because let's be real, like our church is a high demand religion, and there's a lot that the church asks of you. And there's a lot of sacrifice involved in our worship and what we give to the church, in more in terms of times and service than like tithing. Like I know some people have a problem with tithing. I have a testimony of tithing. I don't really have a problem with that, but with like time and service and callings, and there's just other ways in which, you know, you kind of have to stop and be like, whoa, can I handle this? And for me, I was a single parent. There was a period after my divorce, even while I was married and right before I was married, where I really struggled to keep the commandments. I remember feeling like I didn't know if I could keep the commandments. I struggled with the law of chastity. Like I actually lived with my daughter's dad before we even got married. And this is like a whole backstory, but it goes back to the dysfunction in our home. So I ended up moving out like my senior year of high school. Like the way my life got started, it was in such a rocky, difficult place that made it very hard to go to church. And the reason why is because I don't think that anyone ever ostracized me or made me feel like I wasn't welcome at church, but my own insecurities did, if that makes sense. Like the voice inside my head got to me, and then it was hard to go to church for a while. So I think that there can be these different things that maybe we should try to understand about people and why they're doing what they're doing that might help us to, I think, like be more of a friend or a loving, supportive family member for people who are struggling, because there's probably different reasons why, and we might need to understand more about what those reasons are just to be able to even start to have a conversation about how do I help, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I do think it's interesting in your story. You kind of see the example of that I've seen in many people too, where they stop coming to church, and it's easy to make some assumptions because you don't see them for 6 months, and then you go talk to them, and they're like, no, 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 like I'm still active, like I'm still going to church, and I still believe, and all this stuff, and it's like, but you haven't been in 6 months, and they'll be like, no, no, I am gonna go though, and they don't, like, in their mind, they're still there every week, and sometimes this will be like years will go by, and in their minds, they're still active. All right, Cindy, back to you. What do you think would be some suggestions for how to support loved ones who, I'm going to say, stepped away, even though I'm realizing now that we should probably distinguish between like slipped away, stepped away, apostatized, excommunicated, whatever. I don't know how many different subcategories there are. What do you think?
I think it's important not, to generalize is a useful tool, but I think when we're talking about people in our lives, it's really important not to generalize and realize that they have unique stories and that there are so many reasons to step away. And yeah, there's just a lot of reasons, and everybody has a unique story. I mean, you can put them in categories like, oh, they have a problem with history, or they have a problem with current policy, or they have anxiety and have a hard time just walking into the church doors. And so you can put them in these generalizations, but even within those, everyone has a unique little reason for leaving the church, and the timing and the different things that happened that led them to that decision. So I think it's important to remember the uniqueness. I'm still debating with myself whether it's important to really dig deep with a person. Like, I think there are some people that need to share why they left, and they need a listening ear. But even in those cases, I think there needs to be some caution. And then I think there are people that just want their privacy respected. They don't want to be asked at every turn why they left. And I honestly think that there must be some or a lot of these loved ones who don't really know why they left, or they can speak to it, but it's even more complicated than they themselves realize.
Sam, how do we support our loved ones who have decided to step away?
Ooh. So, as somebody who also had periods of inactivity, for very similar, I would say somewhat similar reasons to Jessica, I can point back to the individuals that did support me when I quote unquote stepped away. And that was the example of my parents. So my parents continued to love me. They continued to understand that I needed time to figure out what I was doing with my life, but they stayed firm in the things that they did believe in. And so with that, my father, and I've told this story multiple times, like he still to this day, he'll call me on his drive home, typically on Wednesdays. I don't know why it's Wednesday, but perhaps he does this with my other 7 other siblings in my family. But he'll call on his drive home, and he'll just talk about various things. And even when I was inactive, I always enjoyed our conversations about theology. So we would talk about the scriptures. He would talk about various topics that he had been, looking up or studying at that given time. And that kept me enough engaged with the church, I think, that it kept that little bit of a spark, the little bit of that light that was left in me. It just kept it glowing enough. It always kept the thought of Jesus Christ and the thought of the church at the forefront of my mind, I think, enough to where when I did decide to make the decision on my own, of course, right, uncoerced, that it was my decision truly. But it was still supported by the loved ones around me. And so with that, I kind of want to, so my wife is inactive. She hasn't been active since she was like 14. And I kind of am trying to do the same thing with her, where it's like, hey, I'm setting these boundaries of this is what's important to me, right? My relationship with my family is important. My relationship with my wife is very important. I let her know that. But at the same time, I'm letting her understand that like my relationship with God is also very important to me. And so there's certain things I'm not willing to compromise over. And I think one of those things is this newfound respect or deeper relationship that I've built with God and with Jesus Christ. And so with that, there's certain things that I'm letting her know out front, like, hey, I'm not going to miss going to the temple. Like that's something I'm doing. And at first there was a pushback. It was like, hey, like you're going to go every Friday, like really every Friday. But now actually, interestingly enough, this morning, so I'm an ordinance worker in the Raleigh, North Carolina temple, and I work Fridays. This morning, since I've been gone for about 37 days, I'd kind of gotten off my schedule of, serving in the temple early Friday morning, leaving early Friday morning to do my hour-and-a-half commute up there. This morning, my alarm went off at 5, and my wife rolls over. She wakes me up. She said, hey, don't you need to get up to go to the temple? And I'm like, oh my goodness. And like, I sprung out of bed. I'm like, yeah, absolutely I do. But I had snoozed my alarm because I was like, why do I even have an alarm on right now? I snoozed it, just not even thinking about it. But that happened over a period of, consistent, I'm going every week. And that pushback became something of like, okay, I understand this is really important to you and I'm willing to support you in this thing. And so with that, I'm continuing to support her by showing her a Christ-like example, showing her the fruits of living the gospel. I think to the best of my ability, of course, I'm not perfect, but, and I think that helps. That helps for somebody. It gives them a reason to like continue to even look into or consider returning. So.
Yeah, I love that. So, my wife was thinking about joining us and she wasn't able to make it, but she said, why don't you just share with them what my response would be? I said, okay, that's fine. She said, just follow the Spirit. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's like the perfect hack answer is just follow the Spirit. You never get it wrong, right? But here's one of the things that I've seen with that approach of following the Spirit, because a lot of people are trying and they have a hard time knowing when they're following the Spirit when it comes to such a difficult topic. And one of the things that helps is that you never act in fear. So you never say something to a loved one out of fear, like this classic example for me right now is a high school boy who doesn't want to go to seminary, and his mom's like, "Get up, we're going to seminary. I'm going to take you. Let's go." And it's driven out of this fear that she's going to have a child who's like dysfunctional or whatever because he misses a seminary or something like that. And so if you have someone who is stepping away, inactive, not interested, hateful, whatever, there's a lot of options that you have, but one of the options can never be fear or force, coercion, all the things that we read about in Scripture. Jessica, any thoughts?
Well, I actually 100% agree with this, and I feel like my mom is a really good example of someone who's able to do that, because she's always kind of let us choose our own way. Now, for me, that was fine. It led me to the church and to a really strong testimony. My sister too, but for some of my younger siblings, not so much. They've gone different ways and, have fallen into periods of inactivity in their lives and have chosen other paths. One is to the point where I would say at this point, they're completely out of the church. I mean, not so much that their names are not on the records of the church, because they are, but just hasn't been in so long. We're talking decades now. So that to me, it's like, that's a different path. That's a path outside of the church that they're living. And others who are fine, comfortable having gospel discussions, maybe a little inactive here and there. Young adults often are totally fine. Been there, done that. And then others where they're really struggling with like some really serious gospel questions to the point that it can be like almost triggering to bring it up. And so these are all things that I experienced just within my immediate family situation. I have to be sensitive to those things. But I do think that there is something about respecting like liberty and agency and allowing people to make choices without putting so much pressure on them and lecturing them at every turn and that type of approach. And I think that the reason why is because, isn't that what Heavenly Father does for us? Because I always think about that and I'm like, the Lord, He's very liberal with our agency, with the law of agency. He really doesn't violate it. And I think that you see that a good example that comes to my mind all the time is whenever prophets are praying to the Lord and they're like, how do I do something? And He doesn't give them the answer. He's just like, you're going to figure this out for yourself. And we're studying Doctrine and Covenants this year, and I just look at all these times where Joseph Smith is struggling, like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to build Zion? How am I going to get these people where they need to be? How do we build a temple? We have no money. And it's like, for some reason, God doesn't give all the answers. And I see that in the brother of Jared's story a lot. And I think his story is perfect because you have actually 3 examples that you can compare and you can build a framework off of them. And one of them is, when it was a matter of life and death, when we're talking about breathing inside of these barges that God's trying to have him build, that he already knew how to build, by the way. He's like, oh, I can do this, but we're not going to be able to breathe. And the Lord just answered, and He's like, here's what you can do for that. But when it came to the matter of steering, which is a really great question, it's like, well, how do we steer? God said, don't worry about it, because I'm going to get you there. You just jump in the water right at this spot and I will get you there.
That's true.
And then with the light, and I feel like 90% of what we're dealing with are issues of light, where it's like there's probably more than one way to do this, but the Lord is going to let you choose. And I think this is where, if you think back to the good, better, best talk, was it Delany Chokes? Was it who gave that? This is a really important thing that I see as a pattern in the scriptures, that the Lord allows us to choose good, better, best. And whatever we think is good, better, or best for us, He lets us choose that path. And there seems to be a really important purpose in this. And the one thing that I'm picking up on as I study the scriptures is that this is primarily how he works with his prophets. This is how he trains them to be a governor in Israel. And this is how he trains us to lead our families and our children to be like him. And I see the Lord doing that with the people that I love. He did that with me. And I feel like there's many, many times where I have to go to the Lord and say, I don't understand what's going on here, but I'm going to trust that you know how to get the person that I love from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And that whatever detour they take, the atonement of Jesus Christ is powerful enough to reconcile for them.
Yeah, I think one of the miracles of the modern day this year, really, for me, is the Comeback Podcast. Thanks for being a sponsor of the channel in this episode's Comeback Podcast. No, I'm just kidding. But they have put on a lot of episodes, enough episodes, where it doesn't take very many episodes to realize that people leave for all kinds of different reasons, and they come back for all kinds of different reasons. And it used to, when I was a kid, it used to be a prevalent thought in my mind, and I could see it in other people's minds, that if someone left, that means they were gone forever. They were never going to come back. And that was like this fear that just kind of hovered over every family, that you can never let your child fade away. And the Comeback Podcast, I think, has dispelled that myth. Like, anybody leaves, you can now listen to a few of the Comeback Podcast episodes and realize, oh, there's always hope. My kid or friend or whoever is never going to be gone forever. And so I really appreciate
I think the
that.
Comeback Podcast illustrates a quote that I really love. It's the one that a lot of times people give us flack for believing this, and even David A. Bednar put this one down just a teeny bit. But it was one by Brigham Young. And if you guys go to your Gospel Library app, and Scott, maybe you can do this because I can't, because I don't have my computer. My kids are using all of our computers right now. So, and then you can pull this up, but search the word wayward in the Gospel Library app, and there's like a little short, I can't remember if it's Ensign New Era, like what magazine it's in, but it's in one of them. It's old. And it has all the quotes about wayward. And I read this to you once, Sam. You've read this with me once.
Yeah.
And it's a really good article. It doesn't have David A. Bednar's, I think, in there because it's old. It was before he gave a talk. But he had talked about waywardness and how sometimes we look at, well, we're sealed to our children, so we don't need to worry, like they're going to come back. And we get that from a lot of these quotes by prophets who've made commentary to this effect that if you as a parent stay by the tree like Lehi did, and you keep beckoning, and you yourself keep the covenants that you've made, then you have power through the covenants that you've made to help draw your children back to the Lord, and that at some point, like the penitent prodigal, they will return. And that's what Brigham Young said. And so he was basically just saying, like, stay by the tree. Don't walk away from it no matter what, because there's power in the covenants that you've made by virtue of the covenant. Now, if you take that to an extreme, and this is what I think David A. Bednar was hitting on, then you're not going to do the part that you need to do as a parent for your children to be able to bring that enabling power into their lives. You can't just ignore it and say, well, I'm sealed in the temple. It's fine. Like, everything's fine, right? Because there's always action that you need to do. It's kind of like the idea, if you're not moving forward, you're moving backward because you're on an escalator. So pick up the pace. It's like you don't stand still. Like, you have to be actively, working out your salvation, working on developing those attributes of exaltation. And so I think that that's kind of where he was coming from. He was like trying to present that word of caution that you don't take this to an extreme, but this is a true principle. And there is something about the virtue of the covenant that you make as parents with God that through your obedience and sacrifice, that you can bring power into the lives of the people that you are connected to and that you're a steward over. And I think that that is a true principle. I think you see it in those quotes. And I think that maybe we have more fear than faith sometimes because we're not maybe believing what is said there. Like we don't believe it. It's like sometimes we're just like, I don't know, I'm worried, I'm afraid. But if we really believe that we have power, I happen to believe in the power of being a proxy savior. I do. I see Jesus Christ did it with the atonement, and I see him giving us an opportunity to do this in the temple and through the covenants that we've made, even with him as parents. I do believe that we have power to fast and pray and make something happen, like cause something to happen that wouldn't otherwise come into being.
Like when I was younger.
I think maybe we just don't believe that we do sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, like an Alma the Younger experience. Yeah, I found that quote from Brigham Young. I can read it real quick. So this comes out of apparently quoted in Joseph Fielding Smith's Doctrines of Salvation, as compiled by Bruce R. McConkie. All right. Let the father and mother who are members of this church and kingdom take a righteous course and strive with all their might never to do wrong, but to do good all their lives. If they have one child or 100 children, if they conduct themselves towards them as they should, binding them to the Lord by their faith and prayers, I care not whether those children go, they are bound up to their parents by an everlasting tie, and no power of earth or hell can separate them from their parents in eternity. They will return again to the fountain from whence they sprang. And I think if anything, if I learn anything from a quote like that and things like the Comeback podcast and kind of what we've been talking about here, it is that nagging doesn't work. Nagging is not a missionary tool. Nagging is not a Christ-like principle. Forcing people to comply with your righteous endeavors in your life doesn't help. And I've seen that. I've seen where it's like, okay, well, you can come hang out with us, but you gotta do this, this, and this, and this. And if you're drawing the line at like, don't hurt me, great. If you're drawing the line at like, you gotta act like you're a member of the church when you're around me, even though you're not, that's not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to shift the topic slightly. Does anybody have any thoughts before I shift the topic?
Well, it's interesting you brought up Alma the Younger, right? Because like at the end of the day, what did Alma the Younger, who obviously didn't agree with what his father was teaching, what did he resort back to when all things went bad? When everything went south, he reverted back to what his father had demonstrated to him. And the other kind of story that pops up in my head that obviously I'm certain you guys were thinking about is the prodigal son, right? So the prodigal son, having left the house, wasn't nagged by his father to come back, right? But I'm assuming in that story the father had taught him that he always could come back.
Yeah.
And so when he was destitute, he did come back. And his father
he
accepted him
even
with
says
open
it
arms.
in the story. The prodigal son even recalls that his father, there was an example that his father made that he remembered. And that's what saved him. And I think another thing too is the father stayed home. He didn't follow his son around and, go with him into the city. He stayed home and where he was, like by the tree. It's the Lehi example.
Yeah, he always kept the light on. What is that, Motel 6?
Yeah.
Good one.
No,
Yeah,
but the whole thing with fear too, I was just thinking about that as well. Like perhaps, and I was just thinking about this when you guys were talking about fear, perhaps parents fear because of what they didn't teach their children. Perhaps that is actually what spurs on the fear, in contrast to parents who know that they've done the best that they could do, and they continue to do the best that they can do, and they have that like self-acknowledgement, and so perhaps their fear it's not as great, or perhaps it's not even existent because they understand that like, hey, this is your choice. Ultimately, you are also God's children, right? And so like, I understand I have stewardship being a parent, but at the same time, like, I know God also cares about you just as much, if not more, than I do as a parent. So,
Well, our children are actually our brothers and sisters. right? And I think sometimes it can be humbling to just pause and remember that they
Yeah.
are great and powerful people too, and that we're all brothers and sisters. And I got this once when it was in a talk by Henry B. Eyring. Do you guys remember this? Where he was talking about how he picked up his son and he like, was like really angry, and then all of a sudden he had this thought and like a voice entered his mind. He's like, "You're holding a powerful person," and he was
Oh
like,
yeah.
President
"Do you remember
Eyring?
that?"
Angry?
Yeah, it was an Eyring. Yeah, I know. I said the same thing. I was like, I can't even picture him doing that. But it was when he was younger and he was frustrated with a toddler. And, every parent has been there where you're just like, your patience is worn so thin. And it was at the end of the day. And so he was explaining those situations. And I'm like, we've all been there. And it was such a powerful lesson for me because, guys, I get this like daily with my son. So to be like, he's a child of God. He's my brother too. He's not just my son. And so I have to like remind myself.
Yeah, I think the worst kind of fear as a parent is when you fear what it means about you if your son or daughter misbehaves.
Yeah.
And that's like me taking it personal that my son or daughter's using their agency.
Yeah.
And that's the fear that will drive you to do really dumb things, like sending them an Ensign article every week when they've asked you not to.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Very good. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Cindy.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you for
Bye.
having me on.
Thanks.